So, welcome. Thank you for waiting for us for a couple of minutes. But I want to warmly welcome our two guests, and I'm more than excited to finally understand and help our singers and audience members and friends to understand what is the Villancico. So, hi, Luciana, and hi, Paul. So your names are there on screen, but I wanted to very briefly tell everybody a little bit about you. Feel free to jump in and correct me and add things or so forth. So Luciana, you are currently in your third year of the PhD program in Hispanic literature at the Modern Languages Department at Florida International University. And so you're doing a dissertation, and your research focuses on the colonial villancico, the
Right.
syncretic genres of the 18th century through the musical and the literary approach. Wonderful. And you're a FLAS fellowship recipient from 2019 to 2020 at the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center in Florida International University. Wow, Luciana, fantastic. You are a singer and guitarist, correct?
I play some also the baroque flute, the recorder, and I mainly sing, and I also play some guitar and cuatro, but I'm mainly a singer.
Yes, and you studied music as well, right? In Spain.
Yes, in Venezuela first, and then in Spain, and now in the States, I'm doing some some work with literature and music in the PhD that complements all I have done before.
Very interesting. You have degrees, right, in audiovisual journalism from Venezuela and Masters of Arts in Spanish, and your award-winning Monsignor Pellin Award. Very interesting. I hope we will be able to provide a link at some point so people can find out more about you. And you're an author, Diarios de Venezuela, Diaries of Venezuela. Fantastic.
Yes, I'm never bored. I'm always doing a million things.
Wonderful.
It's worthy.
So, Paul, you hold a Bachelor of Arts in Musicology from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, which is where I grew up too, and I studied at the rival university, the Universidad de Chile. Ha!
Wow.
So we're anyway. Fantastic. And so currently you are a PhD musicology student at Northwestern University in Indiana, right? And
Yes.
and also enrolled in Northwestern's medieval studies certificate program. And you mentioned that your research interests are, you have to perhaps explain this very quickly, modern music in the Spanish colonies. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about that. The musical depictions of otherness and intersections of music with natural philosophy. Paul, that's very interesting.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. My CV is not as outstanding as Luciana's, but yeah,
Wow.
this is my second year of my PhD at Northwestern. I do live in Indiana, in Bloomington, but Northwestern's in Evanston. I
Yeah.
recently moved here. And when I say that my interest lays in the depiction of otherness, otherness is a term that we use to denote the what we think as people, as an other, as something that not as something, as someone who is not ourselves, who we don't identify as being a member of our community. We will talk, hopefully, during this talk, we will talk about, for example, the Galicians, and that would be for Latin American composer, given that during the 18th century, not that many Galicians were traveling, and because of the way that they were depicting them, that's an instance of an other.
Otherness, yes. That's a very important concept, and some place where in our modern society nobody tends to want to go, right? Everybody
Mhm.
thinks about themselves and who we identify with. So I'm very excited about that interest of yours and that you're developing this and bringing this to us. So thank you. And you are as well researching right now on musical representation of imagined soundscapes in Europe and the religious use of compositional devices in early modern Latin American sacred music, which is what we're also obviously presenting and talking about. You've presented in international conferences here in the United States, in Spain, and in Mexico. And very interesting also in terms of the repertoire that we're discussing and also presenting in our season with Crescendo. Your research focuses exactly on that, the catechetical use of the Christmas Villancico in the 18th century Chile, and you will publish in 2021. So fantastic, Paul. So you already started diving into our subjects, right? What is the villancico? So I don't know who of you wants to start on it, and I know it's a deceivingly simple word, the Christmas song, but it's not. So Luciana, do you want to talk about where it originated? What does it mean?
Yeah.
Jump in there.
The name of Villancico comes from villages, the villagers, no, who live in the villages, and they interpret their popular songs in their vernacular languages. As we know, Spain is full of vernacular languages, mainly known by then as dialects, but now are full languages that evolutioned until the point of the modern day. And also, mainly the villancico is a popular song with repeated patterns, and the most well-known form is the stanza refrain form with repeated. The estribillo is the participative part, and the coplas are the part interpreted mainly by a soloist. So the villancico was took by the Catholic Church as a mean to express the scenes of Christianity, mainly the main scene, that is the nativity scene, is the most important moment of the year, also Holy Week, but the nativity scene is the most important theatrical representation, and also visual and pedagogical for Christianity. So it is the source of the great number of villancicos contained in a great number of songbooks. But we are talking about a 400 years genre that has so many variations in so many countries, and it contains several languages configured into the great Hispanic that it was Spain and Portugal right now, the Iberian Peninsula by then, and then the whole Latin American, and also the Portuguese speaking world. And we have a huge field of study, Paul and me and all the people interested in Villancico, so many specialists that has great publications, like 100 years of studies on the Villancico. So it's flexible. The definition is very flexible. I know that Paul will have more to say about this flexibility. And basically, it's a repeated pattern song, can be secular or sacred, used mainly in Christmas, but that can be applied for the whole year inside or outside the liturgy in the Catholic Church. That's what I can say. Maybe Paul can add more.
Oh, thank you. That was fantastic. Yeah. So I may add that on the one part, one of the defining the villancico is actually one of the most difficult things to do. There have been whole discussions about the subject. What we make a difference right now. We have basically two meanings for the word villancico. On the one hand, we have this poetical form, lost in the mists of time. We do find mentions of a music that we recognize as this poetical villancico dating from the 15th century, but Spain, the late Middle Ages Spain, was not a closed place. It was related to in a cultural web with many other European countries. So we find similar music in France, in Italy, even in Germany and so on. But then, and that's the fixed form, and we call it the villancico form. On the other hand, after the 17th century, we have something that we call the Villancico genre. And the Villancico genre is extremely flexible, up to the point that the musicologist Bernardo Illory calls it a meta genre, meaning that it predates and it includes many other genres, dances, music from the theater. It sometimes it's not just a coplas and a estribillo. It also has an introduction, an aria. I found villancicos that are basically an operatic area taken from an Italian repertoire, and they are like refurbishing it for sacred usage. I may also add that we find villancicos usually it's defined as a parallel liturgical music, meaning that it's meant to be used like outside the liturgy, mostly in the canonical hours, meaning the especially matins, as many of us, many of you may know, there outside the mass there are many other times during the day in which, especially monks, that like the laicity also used to pray those. There are many hours during the day in which people used to pray, and those have names and fixed times. And for example, during Christmas, the villancico was performed usually during the matins, meaning at the latest at dawn. But we also know that villancicos of different for different festivities were used during the mass. For example, I work with Mexican villancicos that are for the Eucharist. So I think that to summarize, to define a villancico is extremely difficult. As Luciana said, it's a very fluid genre, and its origins are even more difficult to pin down.
So can you, the curious question that comes to me, so what happened that made this genre so interesting and different in Spain and Portugal and in the New World later as well, compared to what happened in Italy and in France and in Germany, in the other England, and the other Western European countries?
Yes, for me also, it's about the Moorish heritage, all the Arabic world, the presence, because we have French, Italian, and the troubadours world influence through Galicia, but also the Moorish influence in the forms, in the first poetic forms present in the Iberian Peninsula. That is the Sehel and the Muashaha. They're both poetic forms that requires this interactive parts that they have repeated patterns. Especially the topic was about love, as courtly songs also. The love for the lady, and then this love for the lady, it was divinized for the love of the great lady Mary. But this love was transformed, but the intention was also Arabic influence. But this influence is not recognized for the first specialist because it was the discovery afterwards, and also the oral literature. It was the origins of the Spanish lyric is all oral, and is theatrical because it is oral also, and it has influence of the narrative genres as the romance, no, the romance genre, and is very theatrical, having the influence of the golden age that has Cervantes, but also Lope de Vega, Góngora, Quevedo, and all the poets like the ones we have here today to analyze of the concerts you are performing. So it's incredible how also it took for the minor theatrical forms, it took a lot. And if you add Moorish influence, theatrical, and all the European influence, then it's unique because you have a peninsula that has all this geographical situation, the Mediterranean, and also the location, no, the south close, having the Arabic domain, that it was not happening in any other country, like in the peninsula for Spain and Portugal.
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, And perhaps for the, if I may add, for the reasons for the dissemination of the villancico, uh, there are many theories, but in general, for once, during in the Spanish Empire, the only sanctioned musical style that could be played during the liturgical service would be the villancico, the only sanctioned vernacular one, meaning that we need to think about the liturgical service in the 17th and 18th century, even the 16th century. Before the Vatican Second Council, all the mass was in Latin. And the reality is that most people didn't speak Latin. The reality was that even the people that were required to speak Latin, meaning the liturgy, they didn't speak Latin at all. So they memorized everything, and for the most, and also 80% of the music was plain chant, what we call sometimes Gregorian chant. We have calculated that those masses sometimes would run for up to 3 hours, 2.5 hours. So it's an extremely lengthy mass. It's extremely slow, and also people wouldn't understand what was going on. So meaning that for at least for like one reason would be for dissemination of the importance of the villancico would be the necessity to have something in the vernacular that was also like to write some kind of fun. And to attract people to the service. On the other hand,
so a marketing strategy, basically.
It's an early marketing strategy, definitely,
and educational.
And it's very interesting because every now and then the authorities would try to ban the performance of these villancicos. But then if we look very closely to the promulgation of those bannings, they have to reiterate them again and again every 5-10 years, meaning that people were still doing it. They were so important for people that no matter what the authority would say, they were not able to enforce those prohibitions. On the other hand, I may add that because the villancico was so pliable, it was able to incorporate so many other styles. It was always very hip. People would always even if you didn't have a theater and like a professional stage like happening in some smaller places like Chile or Uruguay, you will still be able to listen to that music at church. Right. And finally, I would say that, and perhaps this is like 17th century people would agree more with this, or perhaps the authorities. One of the most important features of the villancico was their ability to promulgate, to disseminate the theological truths, the catechetical meaning to people that were not able to read or who didn't want to read. And that's true for music for Christmas music or for religious music in the vernacular ever since the 13th century.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
Yes, the stanza refrain form is very easy to remember, and that's why it's so repetitive sometimes and became playful. And Bernardo Hilary called it the polychoral culture because it's this kind of interactions that happen in church that was very different from the Latin formula to show the ritual of the mass.
Right, yeah. So tell me a bit, is there anything that you would know? One of the things that always is fascinating, I think also for our audiences, I know it's a broad theme, but it's a contrast of the popular characters that are featured in these villancicos. At the same time, there is a poetic, cultured, literal aspect of poetry and literature in these villancicos. Do you want to talk a little bit about this? It's kind of, yeah.
Yes. Luciana, you're the expert in poetry here. Please
okay. For example, in the villancicos we have for today, say something about specifically the characters. We have some wild characters. close to the rustic world, to the savage, to the really, really wild. Because, in Europe, the wild, the other, it was previous to the conquest, to the arrival of the Spaniard. The savage already existed. So in the medieval times, in the Arcipreste de Vida and the Libro de Buen Amor, or El Conde Lucanor, all the books, medieval books, or even also La Celestina, between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, they have all those characters, wild characters that are from the mountains specifically. That in the case of the ladies are the serranas, and also shepherds. They have shepherds are shapeshifters, because they can be a little bit like courtesans if they are imitating the courtesans, but they can be pretty wild too. So we have those serranas or serranillas or pastores characters, shepherds. And also we have all the clerical characters that are not the priests, because it's not okay to talk wild things about priests. But they have other, like the deacon and the helpers, no, of the priests, all the people involved in church that didn't have the chastity vote. So they can be more playful because they are not restricted. So they can play with the ladies of the mountains, the serranas. They have more freedom to dance and to mingle with these kind of people.
So
So it's
makes the church more human, right?
yes, and more like a procession, because procession was an event that was in the street and in church also, that uh, took from church to the street some things, and from street to the church, that make this intermediate space. So Villancico helps also is a performance that is also like a procession that opens up the gates of the church to the outside, and also permit that some people that is not normally in church can enter and participate in some way. So we have characters like in the middle, like the like deacons and clerks, and also we have the shepherds itself, other kind of shepherds. They say zagales and zagalas, zagales y zagalas, or zagales, which are young boys and young ladies that can be shepherds, but can be courtesans in disguise, dressed like shepherds. And we can have also the Virgin Mary, but Virgin Mary is stereotypical. So you cannot put in her mouth or in her words so many strange things, because we know the liturgy, we know what is the story about. But the soloist of the Villancicos tends to be someone with freedom to speak, as a shepherd, as a music student, as a Galician young shepherd, a gaita performer. Some people with freedom, and it's very theatrical to let these people be, because the rest of the story we mainly know what's happening, but authors were giving us more. So it created a challenge for composers of the librettos, poets that made the librettos, and composers who made the music.
Right.
So
So those were two different people, right? So the composers no longer wrote the texts. Obviously, they were real librettists for early on.
Oh,
yes,
we have famous Villancico writers. For example, Mexican Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz.
True.
The 10th Muse. She wrote like many Villancicos that were published during her life, while she was secluded in the cloister, and also almost immediately set to music by the most renowned musicians in Mexico. And we need to remember that back then, in the late 17th century, uh, Mexico was probably the richest place in the New World. So the fact that the chapel masters, meaning the man that was in charge of the music in the center, in the Metropolitan Cathedral, the fact that he was setting that to music is not it's not a minor feat. So yes, so the by the early modern period, after the 15th century. Definitely we have a division of labor, in which the composers are one thing, but not necessarily, of course, and the poets are usually someone else.
So let's talk a little bit about how the Villancico came to the New World. What the impact there was. Of course, there was all of the colonization of the people in Latin America. And it's an important thing. I know we don't have a lot of time to go so deep, but it's very important for us because it uses a language. And nowadays, I think it's so important to put this in context because it was obviously robbing people of their freedom of belief and making them into slaves. And that is obviously a strong context. And we just perform this music that is happy, obviously. And I'm interested, can you talk a little bit about all of this process and how the indigenous people made this their own, or what they contributed and so forth?
Oh, so it's complicated. It's in the case of this Spanish colonization process is very different from the Anglo one, or from many others. It's, on the one hand, it usually had a very violent beginning. We know about those histories, but eventually they had something different that we call syncretism, and that meant that they were at some level, at least they were, they saw the benefits of mixing their open cultural forms, mixing them with some of the beliefs of the native populations. But also they realized that they were imposing a lot. Eventually, by the early modern period, by the later early modern period, the native populations were mostly assimilated. Maybe not in Chile, though that was basically the last place to be assimilated. But in the rest of the Americas, it was a little different, and they were mostly assimilated. It's not totally, but definitely. So the dissemination of the villancico, the musical style, was, I would say, except for the initial impulse, meaning the very early attempts at setting music in the vernacular languages of the native populations. And in those cases, actually, those weren't really villancicos, were actually liturgical music of other style that they were translating to the native languages. The villancicos were I venture to say 99% impositions from Spain. The people in charge of writing those villancicos were the chapel masters, and it was a very rare occurrence for a chapel master to be a native. They were they were imported from the peninsula, so to say. And that meant that, yeah, on the one hand, you don't have a lot of syncretism from Latin America. Most of the syncretism already occurred in Spain, like what Luciana was saying, that, for example, the mixture with the northern Spanish, from the northern African cultures, from the Moorish cultures, that happened very early in the 14th century, for example, all the 15th century, in the late Middle Ages. What came to the Americas was an already mixed style that, especially after the change in the monarchy, meant also the introduction of styles stemming from other parts of Europe, especially from Italy. One of the pieces that you're performing, or that you're recording, the Chilean one, the Gallego Pastorcillo, it's an excellent example of of an Italianized piece in what we call the galant style that we can find in most Italian opera. The other pieces are earlier, from the 17th century, and they're mostly a mixture of what we call like a Hispanic style that features a very specific choral tradition together with the latest innovations in instrumental musical language, also of course stemming from Italy and from other parts of Europe. Uh, but I guess that the Spanish hallmark would be the sumptuousness of this music. By the 17th century and the early 18th century, Spain was, if not the richest country, and at least one of the richest countries in Europe, and also in the colonies. So, and they they made sure to show that, because that was part of the monarchical display of power, meaning that they would give a lot of money to the musical chapel so that they were able to compose music for 3-4 choirs and have an extremely sumptuous instrumental ensemble.
Right. In the case of the one Villancico, it has oboes, trumpet, and violins, and many voices and soloists. So yeah, it was a big ensemble. Un Gallego Pastorcillo is an anonymous piece. Yeah.
And that.
So go ahead, Luciana.
No, Paul was finishing an idea.
Sorry, last thought. And that ensemble in particular is very specifically an Neapolitan ensemble. So that for me, that's the best example of an 18th century villancico. It has everything.
Interesting. Yes, thank you. Yes, go, Luciana. You were.
No, I was only wanting to add that the process has a big delay, a big gap between what is happening in the continent. Maybe for other colonial process, is not the same gap. But for the characteristics of the Spanish conquest, the type of people who travel in the ships were not well versed in music, or were not intended that this type of the conquest. They were searching the Indies, not looking for America or something similar. So some of them were prisoners, very low educational level. So they were not thinking about bringing an archilute or Villancicos corpus, because it was written and preserved in the collections of every church with every budget. They had to preserve this and to be written, and the particellas and everything was very complex. So in the ships, no instrument as far as we know, and no collections of villancicos. So first of all, the traumatic process started, and once the trauma is almost over, then the administration has to settle. The buildings have to be built, and then the music can arrive with some Italian musicians, some Spanish, that they borrowed or they remember, they copy what they thought they heard, or the poetry they had in hand. So some of the villancicos found, for example, in Nueva Granada or in La Plata, are very similar but not identical, because some of them write by heart or with sources that were recycled. And depending on the budget, for example, in Cuba, Esteban Salas recycled a lot because he had a poor budget in Santiago de Cuba. So he had to recycle and share with other maestros de capillas, chapel masters. And then it's not a process that is gradual. In every part of the colony is different. For example, in the Jesuitic reductions, no, in South America, it was very different, because they work in a different type of community. They use the vernacular languages in a different way than in Mexico, for example. They did other type of rituals. They introduced other rituals. And then, as you know, Carlos III expelled the Jesuits from the continent, and this project stopped suddenly and also traumatically. So there is a lot of trauma in the middle, and also tragedies like the ships sank and the hurricanes in the Caribbean. Also, it was what we have here now is a miracle to have preserved. And sometimes I admire deeply all the musicologists. In my next life, I will study musicology and not all the other things because it needs a lot of study and discipline. And how the musicologists reconstructed all the lost parts, having this knowledge of what was happening and what is predicted based on the history and the stylistic components also, and how they know well the Italian music, how it reached Spain, and how Spain brought it to the Americas. So it's a miracle. I really am admired for all the wonders you do.
So we have one of the villancicos that we will record. This is by Juan de Araujo, who was probably one of the most famous composers that came from Spain to the New World. The particular villancico is a Christmas piece that's called a juguete, which seems to be a special subgenre where the soloist, right, becomes has a special position. And the text is go now, come and play and sing and dance, sing with all your voices. It's very joyful and very almost forceful. Can you talk a little bit about this style and about this particular particularity?
In the case of the juguete, I think the Baroque feast, la fiesta barroca, is also part of what is pedagogical, but it's also the building of a sense of community,
right?
The belonging. More, it's of course also music, it's performance, but it's also this building that is, it's the name itself. It says it needs to be playful because it needs someone else to give me feedback. No, so that's why it's everything included as an invitation. No, come and play, come and dance. Let's be together. If this is what is happening with this dancer and this other and this other, because it implies the description of a community. So it's nothing like solitude, but togetherness. It's the acceptance of the otherness, because for this party, everyone is invited. I don't know if Paul, you think the same about the party.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is it's basically these villancicos, and in general, whenever they make an invitation to participate in the feast, or when they present an other that's calling others to participate, they are especially during Christmas, they are following the mission that was originally ascribed to the shepherds in the biblical narrative. But so that's why there are so many layers here. It's so complex. Villancicos, as Luciana said, villancicos are eminently theatrical. They present a theatrical situation to the listener. They sometimes they will even open with a narrator and the narrator will set the stage. They will tell you what's going on. Like, for example, the Gallego Pastorcilla. I'm sorry, I'm trying to connect everything here. So I'm sorry, I'm talking about several villancicos at the same time. In some villancicos, they will tell you I don't know, 4 shepherds are coming from the hills to the city of Bethlehem, but actually Bethlehem, in this case, there's one villancico with Bethlehem is Santiago de Chile, or Lima in other places. So they will bring Bethlehem to the present. That's another thing. So they will start, for example, with this narration, setting the stage, and then you will have calls that sometimes calling either other shepherds or other people, characters that we call the spectators, originally shepherds, but as Luciana said, sometimes deacons, sometimes Native Americans, sometimes the enslaved population as well. They were trying, as one famous composer of the 17th century, Orazio Becchi, said, they were trying to portray the theater of the war. They were trying to be realistic in their own sense of realism. There was no photographic intention here. They were characterize these people that are others in a very comical way, but also And I think, personally, I think that the intention was not well, it was to characterize an other, but it was also for you to identify with that other. That other is part of your community, so to say. Even if you never met a Galician, even if you never met a Moor, because you are like thousands of miles away in Ecuador. Or some recondite place somewhere. You've never met these people, but they, in theory, they are part of your imagined community,
Right.
and they symbolize yourself as well, even though they are others. So that's why for me, that's why the Villancico was so important from a catechetical point of view, as Luciana said, as a pedagogical tool.
You know what? There is also this aspect that you both are bringing out, and which is my experience. These pieces make fun. The characters make fun of each other, they make fun of the authorities, and they make fun of themselves. And I think that is a very Latin American and Latino, probably Hispanic quality that, again, it breaks down barriers. And I think that's why I have a great attraction for the Villancicos, and I think we should do more of them. I don't know if you can relate in the Ayandar.
Yes, yes. I have some farcical. The
Okay.
farcical and the carnivalesque are also qualities of the Baroque dances.
Yeah.
So Saravan, Chacon,
True.
they should be. And even when we see other type of performances of Lully or Charpentier, we observe this carnivalesque
You're
attribute.
right.
That is the sense is a refined sense of humor, even if it has some gross words. In the words, it's a bit gross sometimes, but it's very refined in the way they present it because it's sophisticated music. As it portrays voices that are truly different. They look similar at the beginning, but they are portraying individual features, no? And also it's a urban space with its own soundscape. We can observe in this lyric that we have the sonajas, the chicken shake, I don't know, sonajas, percussion, small percussion instruments, but a scream is also mentioned. Is chillido, is a scream, and it's a sound that occurs generally outside church. You cannot scream inside church, and supposedly you cannot even dance. So now you hear a scream, now you dance, and it's a classical dance, carnivalesque. So it means freedom, and it's in the words of the shepherds because Pascual and Gila are shepherds, so they are supposed to have this freedom, but it is also in the words of all who are dancing, that are us. No, we are in church dancing because they invited us. We cannot say no. No.
Right. And they make fun of the name even. Pascual, cual, the choir repeats that
Yes,
second part of the name, right?
this is part of the rhetorical figure analyzed by Judy Tarling, especially, and others, of course, and it has classical influence of the Greek and Roman, like everything we have now, but is mainly the classical rhetoric when you have augmented sensation, surprise, repetition, and all these are convincing strategies like the political debates
Yeah.
and repetition and augmentation, no, the amplification.
Yeah.
It's a type of amplification to repeat the last, not only because of the meaning. Qual has a meaning as Pascual. They are
Right.
both words has meanings because sometimes it's only onomatopoeia, but those words has meaning and they create that amplification effect. That is
Right.
double effect for pedagogical reasons.
So cual means which one, right?
Yes, like
So
it's like a question. Pascual, ¿cuál?
Pascual
Well,
is the name of the person, right? And then
yes.
cual. So
It's
the
a game because
musicals.
game is a characteristic of the Baroque, and especially the Baroque lead by Góngora. The Gongorismo phenomenon on literature is a game, but a game like an enigma. So it's type of enigmatic because it play with the words, similar words that if you don't listen well, you think you're listening the same and the same, but you need to go deeper because it's Baroque. So you need to decipher the enigma.
Right. And the phrase, even that phrase gets repeated several times. So you have an opportunity, you hear it for the first time, and then, like in good rhetoric, it gets repeated. It goes, repite Pascual, cual, repite Pascual, cual. So the whole chorus does this cual several times.
Yes, and it's also the echo that
Echo.
Monteverdi
Yes.
taught us how to do it,
It's
right?
very charming. It's also so, but anyway, that illuminates it so much deeper than just, oh, this is an echo. Well, wow, thank you. So we coming close to the end of our discussion, and I know I would like to go into so much more detail, but is there anything burning that you feel that we need to talk about still? So I know that Paul had do you want to say anything about the instruments in that Gallego pastorcillo, in the Chilean anonymous 18th century galant style, right? It's a kind of a later style.
Well, it's, I think that by now it's not no secret that I truly admire that piece, mostly because in the case of that piece of music, we can find it in the Cathedral of Santiago de Chile. And the things that that cathedral burned down in the middle of the 18th century. So actually, I think that that piece in particular is the oldest one we have. I also think that it was brought to Chile by the chapel master that arrived by the end of the 18th century, José de Camperros, meaning that it probably comes from the Cathedral of Lima. And I think that's interesting in itself because it tells us about the influence from the Cathedral of Lima. Also, that cathedral in particular depended on the Cathedral of Sevilla. So there's like this interconnected network of influence. In the case of the Gallego Zarcillo, it's representative of an middle to late 18th century style that most people would recognize in a different guise in the music of Mozart, for example. So it's closer to that one than to for example, the Araujo, which is a little earlier. And that music was the monarchy, the new house, the Bourbons that arrived there in the early 18th century, encouraged the dissemination of that music in particular after they conquered the Naples. Also, Naples was the capital of that music. The musical ensemble that we have in Gallego Pastorcillo is stereotypical of Neapolitan music. But I think it's also very interesting that in one point of the music, we have a section that the copyist, meaning the one who copied the music, not necessarily the composer, calls a gaita, meaning a bagpipe. As Luciana mentioned in passing, the bagpipes are a symbol that stands for the shepherd. I mean, it was already the text was telling us that these Galician people were shepherds at the same time. So, but also that this musical sign reinforces that. And very interestingly, the gaita is an effect made by the violin playing two notes or more than two notes at the same time, one of which is a drone, a pedal
drone,
note.
Yeah.
Right. While
so the D string gets held, right? So I wish I had a violin. Yes.
Yeah. So the drone would be the drone of the bagpipe, and the upper line would be the chanter of the bagpipe. So this is a very interesting musical symbol.
Yeah. So, whoa. Anyway, it's wonderful.
I wanted to say
Did you
something.
have?
Just
Oh,
a
go
small
ahead. Yeah,
bird,
Paul.
a
Did
little
you?
bird.
To have the manuscript that you wanted to show us? But let's see what Luciana wanted to add.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, and that to complement what Paul was saying, that we have this shepherd that is connected to nature enough to know the type of birds who bring us something that is a new day, as Jesus, when he's born, is giving us a new chance. So we have this shepherd word, the pastoral, that is an evidence of knowledge of nature. That shepherds are wise people that knows what's happening outside, not
Yeah.
inside church, but on nature. So it's very connected to nature and is a minority. So it prepares us for all the minorities we will encounter afterwards in the new world. Because then we face first the minorities in the Iberian world and then we face the other one. But we had a good preparation for this.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And that's just one thing before I share that it's really what Luciana is saying is really interesting, because in the 18th century there was a new influx of in the world of philosophy, telling us that, especially like a little later, like with like exemplified by someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, saying that the shepherd, the natural world, is what we have to aspire for. We are far away from our roots. We're alienated from our beings, and now the shepherds. Well, that's the answer. So let me show you that. Let me show you what I'm. Do you see this?
No, we still. Oh, yeah, it's
Yes,
coming.
yes, yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
Okay. So as you can see, this is the manuscript. These are my pictures of the manuscript. As you can see, it's called, yeah, this is the acompañamiento, meaning the paso continuo of the gallego. That's called, it's for Christmas. And at this point, this is the part called gaita, meaning the bagpipe.
Mm.
The bagpipe,
The
right.
bagpipe, and we can see that's also in 6/8, which was one of the stereotypical pastoral time signatures.
Yes, yes.
And yes,
And lots of health harmony notes, lots of
also
these.
uh,
Yes.
we said drones there.
Yes,
More
yes.
importantly, let me see if I can find the
The violin, yes.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
now see the other line.
that's the upper line, yes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to return now.
Okay, well, yeah, this it's always so beautiful to see the manuscript. It just brings us back to where this comes from. I want to thank both of you enormously, and I hope that we will continue this discussion, because what I think moves me very much is, yes, we want to know history and we want to know stylistic things, but what you both bring is this understanding of that has so much meaning in our times now, right? This, what you're talking about, the otherness or the other, the minorities, and how that whole music impersonates that or brings this to us. So I can't thank you enough for that way of talking about the music. So, and I want to invite our audience members and friends to follow us and click in on December 19, properly to prepare for Christmas. We will hear these villancicos alongside with very contrasting Bach's Christmas oratorio and African American spiritual gospel music in a celebration of the three Christmas in three cultures. So December 19, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Click in, and this will also be available later on. So, Luciana and Paul, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Se pasaron.
I hope to see you in other opportunities and your audience too,
Thank you.
to enjoy pieces like Pues mi Dios ha nacido is one of my favorite villancicos ever. So it's a combat to know why Jesus came. Jesus came to die, no? And then there's a combat. Let him sleep. No, 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 no. He
No,
doesn't have to sleep.
yeah,
So we have a combat right now. We have a combat
yes.
surrounding us.
We struggle.
And with this, they fought for the right reasons. These
Yes.
villancicos, so we need to do the same.
Yes, we will. Oh, that's wonderful. Nice thought to close. Thank you, Paul, as well.
Thank you so much for having me.